But let's look at depression from the standpoint of a deeper biological phenomenon, which is inflammation and the immune system. There's growing evidence now that many forms of major depression, if not all of them, relate to excessive inflammation. Now, inflammation plays an important role in wound healing. It is a positive aspect of our immune system, our ability to combat wounds, combat illnesses, etc. But inflammation gone unchecked, inflammation that lasts too long or is of too high amplitude, meaning too many cytokines and things of that sort in the body, is bad. And there's decent evidence now that inflammation can lead to or exacerbate depression, and that if we want to control depression or limit or eliminate depression, that focusing on reducing inflammation and its associated pathways is a really good thing to do. And I think this is a really good thing for everybody to do, regardless of whether or not you suffer from depression or not. Okay? So first of all, who are the major players in creating chronic inflammation in the brain and body? They are the inflammatory cytokines, things like IL-6, interleukin-6, things like tumor necrosis alpha, TNF-alpha, things like C-reactive protein, all right? When we are stressed, chronically stressed, we get inflamed. Our brain and various locations in the brain become inflamed because certain classes of cells, in particular those glial cells, the cells that are typically thought to just be support cells, those cells and their biochemistry and their dialogue with the neurons of the brain and body starts to become disrupted. It turns out there is a set of actions that we can take in order to limit inflammation. One of those approaches is to increase our intake of so-called EPAs, or essential fatty acids. Increasing our intake of these essential fatty acids, in particular the EPA variety of omega-3s, can lower the effective dose of things like SSRIs. The threshold level seems to be about 1 gram, 1,000 milligrams of EPA. So you will sometimes see on a bottle of krill oil or fish oil or any other source, even, plant source or other source of EPA, that it's 1,000 milligrams or 1,200 milligrams. But what's really important to look at is whether or not there's more than 1,000 milligrams of EPA, because the EPA in particular is what's important here. So how would this work? These inflammatory cytokines act in a variety of different ways, but they mainly act to inhibit the release of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine, or the synthesis of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Dopamine, also called 5-HT, essentially derives from a precursor called tryptophan. Tryptophan arrives into our system through our diet. Okay, tryptophan is an amino acid. Tryptophan is eventually converted into serotonin. However, if there's excessive amounts of inflammation, these inflammatory cytokines cause tryptophan to be diverted down a different pathway. The pathway involves something called IDO, idolamine, which converts tryptophan into kynurenine. Kynurenine actually acts as a neurotoxin by way of converting into something called quinolinic acid. Okay? And quinolinic acid is prodepressive. So if that seems like a complicated biochemical pathway, what's basically happening here is that the tryptophan that normally would be made into serotonin, under conditions of inflammation, is being diverted into a neurotoxic pathway. And ingestion of EPAs, because it limits these inflammatory cytokines,